All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our preview and prediction for the Rose Bowl game. Number 1, Michigan. Number 4, Alabama. Wolverines, 1.5-point favorites. 45.5 is the early total. 5 p.m. Eastern Time, New Year's Day on ESPN from Pasadena, California. Looking at the Michigan offense, Nick, it's been a big year for J.J. McCarthy. At one point was the Heisman favorite. And, he's been very creative with his legs, but also his accuracy, 74% on top of 2,600 yards, 19 touchdowns. He's protected the ball of only 4 picks. And this is a guy that's certainly going to have to elevate his play against a very tough, stifling defense. Just held another guy who was red hot in Carson Beck well in check. This is a guy that has not had a 200-yard game since about 2 months of ball without a impressive yardage total. He's going to have to approach 250, 300 in this game as it figures they're going to struggle to run the football. What do you expect to see from McCarthy in a game of this magnitude?
Certainly one of the toughest defenses that J.J. McCarthy will have to face this season. This is a very talented and stingy Alabama defense. It looked fantastic against Carson Beck in Georgia in the SEC title game. McCarthy has not really had the best past month or so, struggled in the Penn State game, looked better in the Ohio State game, didn't really need to be used outside of that against Iowa, where they really were able to control that game against a very poor offense for the Hawkeyes here. McCarthy steps in. This is a big spotlight moment in the Rose Bowl, right? Michigan, they're back to the playoff, third year in a row, third straight Big Ten title, but they've yet to get over that hurdle of winning in the first playoff game. They lost to Georgia 2 years ago. They lost to TCU last year. This is a big opportunity against a fantastic red-hot Alabama team. McCarthy's 74% completion percentage, about as good as you can get in terms of completing the pass. He's very well at getting the ball on target. He has very fantastic mechanics in that regard. Good field vision as well. Rarely puts the ball into a danger zone. You only saw that once or twice in the past. And you saw it against Michigan once, and you've seen it a couple other times. But he's really good at protecting the ball. 2,600 yards for him, 19 touchdowns passing, 4 picks, a 170 passer rating. Good numbers for McCarthy. He's going to stand there in the pocket. This Alabama pass rush, though, is quite fantastic. I know Michigan's offensive line has held up well. That's a battle to watch. Can this Alabama defensive line make McCarthy uncomfortable and stuff the run and force him to throw the ball?
1 touchdown in the last 5 games. Again, like you said, they haven't lost any games. A lot of good management, but that was a great throw in between 2 defenders against Ohio State. So he certainly steps up when it matters most. This receiving core, though, Roman Wilson's great. 11 touchdowns for him, 662 yards on top of 41 receptions. He's great at the sticks. This is a guy you look to convert on the boundary. You can also put him in the slot sometimes on the inside. Colston Loveland, though, this guy was big against the Buckeyes. Expected a big breakout year for him. 572 yards, 4 scores on top of 40 receptions. 88 yards against the Buckeyes. That was a season high. They were able to find him over the middle of the field often for big chunks of yards. And that was the way they were really able to, sustain some nice offense in terms of putting up points. Cornelius Johnson, a physical pass catcher, TMI 42 grabs, 567 yards. That's 3 receivers I have over 560 yards, and I think that's really impressive. After that, though, it's a big drop-off. Donovan Edwards has been a good check-down player for them. After that, not much. Samaje Morgan has a couple of receptions, and he's been great for them on special teams. Has 2 rushing touchdowns on 3 touches. So he's a bit of a gadget player they're going to look to feed in this contest. But like we said all the way back in August, this is not a team that, has deep amounts of weapons. It's not the greatest talent. And they're going against some nice physical corners from Alabama. This might be a problem for them.
A team that lacks that standout talent. It's never really been the MO in Michigan. They kind of just work with what they have, use the talent to their advantage. Roman Wilson is their best wide receiver. The drop off after him, though, is very steep. Wilson, I like him a lot with the 662, 16.1 yards per grab, 11 scores, good numbers. Loveland, a big physical player who has looked good, and he has kind of been unleashed the past couple of games here, which I think is really positive for this offense. They're getting Loveland involved. He's a really solid tight end, a good young physical player, 572, 14.3, and 4 scores. But it drops off pretty steeply after Cornelius Johnson there. It really is tough to find who's going to be able to step up. Morgan, like you said, a very talented special teams player, hasn't really been able to be used fully in the passing game to his full capabilities yet. This could be an issue if the Alabama secondary is playing the full strength. When you guys got guys like Downs, Arnold, and Kool-Aid McKinstry there playing in the secondary, it's going to be a tough matchup. We saw them have a pretty good day against the Georgia wideouts in the SEC title game. You can expect the same thing from Alabama. It might be tough for Michigan to stay in the game and really be able to keep up and put a lot of points on the board.
And the biggest matchup of the playoff is going to be this run attack against the run defense of Alabama. Blake Corum, 1,028 yards, finally healthy for this playoff run. 24 touchdowns. A lot of that comes at the goal line. short yardage specialist. Donovan Edwards only about 382 and 3 touchdowns this year. His efficiency is about 3.5 yards per carry. Seems to get more touches in these bigger games, though, so they've certainly kept him healthy throughout the year. 10 carries each against Penn State and Ohio State. Only 4 rushes, though, against Iowa. This is a rushing attack that I've certainly criticized at times for not being as efficient and not having as many as explosive plays either. But they grinded down Penn State in that second half. In the fourth quarter, they only had a $156 against the Buckeyes, but in that last frame, they were able to grind them down and really, win that game. They had like a 6-7 minute drive to really put that one away. They do have 35 touchdowns, though. They're incredibly hard to stop in the red zone. Against Iowa, though, I figured they'd be able to ride down the Hawkeyes as well. 66 yards on 34 carries, less than 2 yards per attempt, Nick. That's an elite run defense. They're facing another one on New Year's Day. If this team cannot run the ball, they could be in for some big issues, and I think that's where the biggest concern comes from. For me, is that Michigan, they have a great rushing attack, but when you can't run the ball, you don't have the weapons to beat these elite defenses over top, and you've seen that a couple years ago against Georgia where they got hammered in Miami.
If they struggle to run the ball, it could certainly be similar to what we saw in Miami against Georgia. Blake Corum, a fantastic back, 1,000 yards. He's fully healthy, 24 touchdowns. Great. If they get in the red zone, they're going to be tough to beat. Alabama has had some struggles at times in the red zone against the run. That could be a tough recipe for a disaster there for Alabama. I think, Michigan has these 2 talented backs in Corum and Edwards who both can carry the rock. We saw it against Penn State. We saw it against Ohio State. But we saw against Iowa that they struggled to move the ball. That average, like you said, is just far too low. And if Alabama can have similar success to Iowa had, they can find themselves in a very good position because Alabama has a great offense. Iowa didn't. This is an opportunity for Alabama to stuff the run, put Michigan behind the chains, and make McCarthy throw and create mistakes. This Alabama defense could have a very good chance to put up nice potential to stop this team and give the offense some nice field position to put up some points.
This offensive line, once again, one of the nation's best. Trevor Keegan at left guard is having a phenomenal year. Drake Nugent has been an elite standout for them at center, coming over from Stanford. Right guard, though, Zach Zinter, he got, a major leg injury against the Buckeyes. He's obviously not going to play. They ended up putting Carson Barnhart at right guard against Iowa. And right tackle, Trente Jones ended up getting the nod. And he's been great for them. He's a veteran player. Probably should have played more this year. They've certainly rolled him out in, some of those 6-7 lineman sets. Miles Hinton as well. Biggest concern with me, though, I'm much happier they're going to kick Barnhart inside as he's been a liability for them at tackle, especially against these more impressive pass rushes like Penn State, where he absolutely mauled. They shut down the passing attack because of him. And then at left tackle, Ladarius Henderson also seems to be a bit of a liability. And, Miles Hinton has been better when he's played in those roles at tackle, but he doesn't figure to be a full-time starter here, especially in this game. I believe Jones is going to get the nod at right tackle, Henderson at left, Nick, and I think that might be a big concern with these tackles against these pass rushers. That also really worries me once more.
I think you need to move Barnhart into the interior. Obviously there is a potential for trouble on this offensive line. I think Henderson at left tackle could be some issues there. I think this is a fantastic offensive line unit. We've seen them block. They've been able to create a lot of nice momentum for this offense. The rushing attack temp has been solid, 4.27 yards per attempt on the ground. A lot of that does rely on the big physical offensive linemen. They face a tough challenge here in this defensive line for Alabama, though. It's going to be a tough matchup, especially on that outside. Like you said, the edges, they got to cover guys like Dallas Turner, who are going to be blitzing in and putting heavy pressure on J.J. McCarthy. It might be a tough matchup for them.
Yeah, and they certainly held up pretty well against the Buckeyes. They were able to find guys across the middle, just flanking your tight ends out to the boundary. Just try to be a little bit more creative, with Morgan as well. And that's what helped them get past the hurdle of the Buckeyes. They were able to score in most of their possessions. Looking at the Alabama offense, this is a unit really wanted to see how they would do. Jalen Milroe answered the call. It wasn't a perfect performance by any means. Certainly started slow through the air. Ended the day with 192 and 2 touchdowns. These 3 straight games without interception for the last 5. He's showcasing tremendous improvements. I figured that they would implement more QB run at some point due to his, elite acceleration. They've certainly been successful in doing that in spurts. He's good at Auburn running the ball. LSU, he completely bushwhacked them. And this is a guy that certainly has developed in key areas. His decision-making is much improved from when we saw him week 2 against Texas. His pocket awareness is much better. Now, this is a guy that certainly likes to trust his pocket a little bit too much, Nick. He certainly is kind of struggling when it comes to bailing out and when not to. And, I guess that's not the hardest of criticism, considering he always wanted to bail out of the pocket. 468 rushing, 12 touchdowns, ended up taking 4 sacks, which dropped his number to 29 rushing against Georgia. What is your biggest criticism of Milroe so far? He's facing another physical, front 6, great defensive line where he cannot afford to hold the ball and put his team behind the sticks.
The Milrow we saw in September against Texas is not the same Milrow that we have here in December right now. He has developed one of the best stories for an offensive player in college football, in my opinion, just really improving leaps and bounds every single week. The 65% completion percentage, fantastic, 2,700 yards, 23 touchdowns, six picks. Like you said, last 3 games, no interceptions. That's the very big key thing to look at here is, can he keep possession of the ball, limit the turnovers? I think Alabama will have success on offense if they do so. I am still worried about the pocket. We saw it in the SEC title game. He took a sack or two that he probably shouldn't have, and made a mistake or two where he probably should have got rid of the ball. The design quarterback runs, we saw that in the second half against Georgia. I think that looks very good. I like the way that Tommy Rees is dialing up the game plan. Rees will have a few weeks to sit down here and dial up a perfect game plan for this Michigan defense. I like the idea of running the ball with him a lot. We're unsure of Jason McClellan's health. We'll get to him in a minute. But if McClellan is still out by this point in time, I like to see him continue to use Miller to run. He's been fantastic on the ground, 468 and 12 scores, big, physical. And now that he's getting the accuracy better and, making better decisions, he's not always eyeing up his first read. The biggest criticism in the early fall was that if his first read was gone, he'd make a mistake and, panic. Now that his first read might be covered, he's shifting, finding the next guy, and making that progression that you need to make as a high-level college quarterback. I'm very pleased with what I've seen out of Jalen Milrow so far this season.
Miller obviously has an impressive deep ball. That's always been a notion of his. But one thing he always struggled with was the short to intermediate accuracy, and he's certainly improved that area tremendously. And he's developed a nice rapport here with Isaiah Bond. He didn't only have that big touchdown against Auburn to save the season, but he had 75 yards in that game, 79 here against Georgia. I think most of that came on that final drive to really put things away. 44 grabs, 621 yards, 4 touchdowns across the middle of the field. These guys seem to be really good together. And then on the boundary, and then downfield, Jermaine Burton is a big weapon for him. 777 yards, 8 touchdowns, 22 yards per catch. He only had 2 grabs for 28 against Georgia. One was a touchdown. The other one, I think, was a third down conversion. That's after back-to-back 100-yard games. This isn't exactly a possession receiver by any means. Only once this year does he have more than 4 grabs in a game, and he put up 200 yards in doing so. This is a big playmaker for Alabama. 1 year too late, I would say, but it's perfect timing for them as they're here in the college football playoff. Amari Nyblack at tight end has 4 touchdowns. Kobe Pratis, C.J. Dupree, Malik Benson, Kendrick Law. Some of these guys, rarely get involved, but when they do, it's for big plays. They have a lot of speed and athleticism, this receiving core that can make people miss in the open field. But Alabama's really deadly in the middle of the field now, Nick, with this improved accuracy of Milrow in the intermediate range.
Certainly an improvement. Being able to hit those guys in the middle of the field has really worked out. This is a deep wide receiving room that has some nice names. Burton, obviously your headliner. Like you said, the numbers for him are solid, 22.2 yards per grab. Isaiah Bond, the hero against Auburn, a very solid player, 621 for him, the 14.1 and the 4 scores. Nyblack looks good. Prentice looks good. C.J. Dupree, a very solid tight end as well. He's only got 9 catches, but 19.1 yards per grab. Malik Benson, Jalen Hale. Kendrick Law's been involved in some trick play stuff. They have some other guys deeper down that they could use. Ja'Cory Brooks, haven't really seen him at all this year. He could potentially be involved as well. So overall, this is a deep wide receiving room for Alabama. I like what I see out of them. They've got better throughout the season. The completions for them, 23 receiving touchdowns is solid for this unit. 6.36 total yards per play on offense for this Alabama Crimson Tide offense. It's getting better, and they have a pretty decent running room that we could hopefully see some success in against Michigan here.
Yeah, the Alabama running game, I figured they would probably struggle significantly against Georgia, but they were even better than I thought. They only had the day of 114 yards on 41 touches. Milrow obviously taking some of those sacks, brought the number down. Roydale Williams, though, 64 yards on 16 touches. He had a score. He had nice physical running. Jam Miller had some impressive runs as well. He had 23 yards. This running game was much better than I thought it would be, Nick, especially between the tackles and on that first touchdown drive. That's what they were able to do, with a consistent rhythm, was run right at Georgia, which we kind of talked about how the Bulldogs are a little bit more vulnerable this year in that area of their defense. Michigan, they're not as vulnerable in that area, but I think if they want to have success, they're going to have to do more than just running downhill, and they certainly don't want Miller to have only 30 yards rushing net. So I think like you said, you're going to see a lot of design QB run, regardless if Jason McClellan plays or not. I was very impressed with what these guys were able to do, and I think that's going to ride some momentum into this ball game.
I was also impressed with the way they were able to run downhill against Georgia. Roydale Williams, Jason McClellan, Jamar Miller are all solid players. Jam Miller had a pretty decent day against Georgia. He got some extra touches If Jace is ready to go, that's a really big add for this Alabama offense. If not, I think Roydell Williams and Jam Miller could be the ones to lead on the ground. They also have that absolute wild card there with Jalen Milroe. I love the idea of having a ton of design QB runs in this game against this Michigan defense.
In this offensive line, obviously before the 2021 SEC title game, people thought they were going to absolutely get railed by Georgia. And that was probably the assumption in this one, too, is the offensive line certainly has been a bit of an issue. But I thought they played one of their best games yet. They did give up those 4 sacks, but a lot of that was just him holding the football. Miller trying to trust his pocket, not being, aware of, being able to throw the football away. Caden Proctor played his best game of the year against the toughest opponent. Highly impressed with what he was able to do in that one, but he certainly has been a problem this year at left tackle. Starting to play better football. Tyler Booker, an elite left guard. He also had a phenomenal showing against the Bulldogs. In the middle at center, Seth McLaughlin. He's been pretty solid in pass protection, but his snaps have been a big issue. One more bad snap, and that could go right over his head and end the game. That's what could have happened against Georgia. Jaden Roberts, he's really emerged there at right guard. He's going to be the main guy there for them. Glad they were able to figure that out. And, of course, a bookend at right tackle and J.C. Latham. They're finding their stride at the right times, this offensive line. They got to be very impressed with Saban's coaching job here on, this starting 5. It was kind of a mystery for most part of the season. But right now, I think they're very happy with what they have.
Outside of the issues snapping the ball from Seth McLaughlin, where the snaps sometimes are a little too off center, they sometimes have issue with that. Miller has some issues, but outside of that little small issue there, this offensive line has gotten better. Proctor, he got torched against Texas. He has really come a long way since that game. Looking phenomenal at left tackle. Tyler Booker looks fantastic at left guard as well. That very youth and inexperienced left side of the offensive line is getting better every single snap they play. I've been very impressed with them overall. This offensive line is getting better as season goes on. It's certainly helping the running attack for this Alabama offense. 4.33 yards per attempt on the ground, 35 total yards, points per game is the average, 35.1. Solid numbers. This Tide offense is rolling here, and now they roll into Pasadena with a chance to try and put up some points against a pretty good Michigan defense.
Yeah, looking at that Wolverine defense, obviously they've been phenomenal against the run this year. 2.9 yards per carry by their opponents. They're only giving up, a very slim margin per game, 86 yards that is. Season high 164 out against Penn State. They really held them in check for the most part. Ohio State, they had that one scoring drive. They ran it at them like 7-8 straight plays, and they marched right downfield. That was it, though. Only 107. Only ran the ball 28 more times. I feel like Ohio State, if they ran it more, they probably could have had some more success. But overall, this is a Michigan defense. Only once have they allowed over 150 yards. They have a very stout defensive line. Mason Graham, Rashawn Benny is a big-time player, 6'4", 296. You have another big guy in Kenneth Grant, who's 340 pounds. This is a strong interior. He's got plenty of guys that can throw at you. Chris Jenkins, he's 9th on the team at TFL, and he's probably the most talented guy they have on their D-line. For example, Cam Good, another veteran, came over from UCF a couple years ago. I mean, they're very sound here on the interior. And then, of course, Josiah Stewart has been great for them off the edge. More importantly, probably Jalen Harrell and Braden McGregor. This is a phenomenal unit. They just played a great, deep defensive line from Georgia. But I think the Michigan pass rushers have proven to probably be better than the Bulldogs ones at this moment in time, where that was certainly the biggest struggle area for Georgia's football team right now on the roster is edge rushing. And they have plenty of that in Michigan, Derek Moore being another one. What's your expectation here? Again, the tackles, the offensive line for Alabama, they just played probably their best game of the season, but now they face a better edge rushing presence.
This is a very physical, nice edge rushing presence here from this Michigan defensive line unit. Jalen Harrell, 28 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks. Rashawn Benny, 27 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack for him. Stewart, 26, 6.5, 4.5 for him, 2 pass breakups, big physical player. Kenneth Grant, 26, 4, 2.5 for him. Cam Goody, 24, 3.5, 2 for him. Chris Jenkins, 33, 3.5, 1.5 sacks, and then Derek Moore, 32 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. So these guys have nice production value here, good numbers. They're very physical, hard-hitting players. They have nice speed off the edge there, and they're playing against this offensive line. They can try to exploit a unit on the left side that's a little weak at time. I know they've gotten a lot better, and I just sang their praise a few minutes ago, but they do have some weaknesses still. If you're trying to pick that apart, I think attacking from the left side is a very key success and could really work out for Michigan.
The Wolverines have a phenomenal part of their defense in the 4-2-5. Junior Colson, he's been great for a couple of years. He's a physical playmaker for them. Michael Barrett's emergence, though, has certainly helped shore up that 1-2 punch. 52 total tackles for him, 2.5 TFL. He has 3 forced fumbles. Well, they have nice physical specimens there. Ernest Hausman, the Nebraska transfer, gets involved. He's the third leading tackler for them. Well, this is a really great front six. It's one of the best in the country. I don't think it's a fluke one bit. 2 years in a row now, they've been absolutely dynamite against the run. Obviously, in their playoff game last year, though, Nick, they got absolutely torched. 263, 3 touchdowns against TCU. They were playing a lot of cover one, a lot of man coverage, and it absolutely ate them up. I don't think you're going to see much of that in this ball game, but I certainly wonder how they will do now that they finally are facing a quarterback that can, expose them in the, QB run department, because that's not something they've seen all year or probably at all over the last 2 seasons. So, when it comes to Colson or Barrett and QB spies and trying to also hold up in the back end, I think that's going to be something we're eagerly waiting to find out. Should be interesting to see what happens.
Junior Colson and Michael Barrett, the heartbeat of this defense in the middle there at linebacker. 79 total tackles for Colson, 2 sacks, 2 pass breakups. Barrett, 52 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him, 2 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 recoveries for Barrett himself. They are a very strong unit. This entire front six I really do like. They are matching up here against Milroe, who is that sort of wild card dynamic. And like you said, they got beat on the ground against TCU last year. Alabama certainly has the weapons to do so, again, similar to what the Horned Frogs did last year. That is something to watch. Is this Michigan defense going to be able to stop the run and put that in situations where Milroe has to win the game with his arm, which I think he certainly can. But that's something that you want to take that gamble if you're Michigan, try to force him to throw as much as often as possible.
I would say Nebraska is probably the only team they've faced that can, work with that QB threat. Their offensive line is also incredibly poor. They only had about 105 rushing in that game. So I certainly don't think that's going to be the greatest tape to look at trying to counter this here. Look at the secondary. This is a unit that's, had 16 interceptions. They've only allowed 7 touchdowns. They were not good against Maryland. They were a little bit better against Ohio State. I mean, there were still some big plays that McCord was able to dial up. They got absolutely dominated by Marvin Harrison Jr. If he only got some more targets, it would have probably been a lot worse for them. They were able to, get to the quarterback there and sealed the deal with an interception on that final drive. This is a secondary that's incredibly talented. You look at Mike Sanders still in the slot. He made that full-time conversion from wide receiver to this spot. Expected big things out of him. He's had an All-American-like season. He's probably their best ball hawk as well. He had 2 of them against Maryland. He has 5 now on the year. Will Johnson on the other side, he has 3. Certainly want to see what his status will be. It seems like he's a little banged up after the Iowa game. And then, he did not play in the Iowa game, that is. He was banged up in the Buckeye game. Josh Wallace on the other side. These two struggled, pretty good against Maryland. Certainly, again, had their issues with the Buckeyes, Nick. And they certainly aren't going to be facing the exact same threat that Ohio State had, but they're going to be facing athletic pass catchers that can tear you up underneath. And that's where Maryland had a lot of success. They also were able to win a lot of contested catches as well. Bama has playmakers at wide receiver, regardless of what the production may say. So these corners, they got to be on point in this game.
These corners certainly have to be on point. This whole secondary has to be on point here. They have a tough matchup here against this Alabama defense that has looked really good, or offense, beg your pardon, has looked really good. Like you said, Sinisteri has been fantastic at corner. 30 total tackles, 4.5 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 5 picks, 6 pass breakups. Rod Moore, 29 total tackles, 2 interceptions, 2 pass breakups. Very solid. Will Johnson, if he goes, he's a big player to have back. The extra time off here is certainly helping his recovery. 20 total tackles, 3 interceptions, 4 pass breakups. Quentin Johnson as well has a pick and 4 pass breakups, 20 total tackles. There are some nice production here. They are facing a very talented unit. I don't think there is a player on the Alabama offense that's quite like Marvin Harrison Jr., but they do have some talented pieces at wide receiver that could be a nightmare for this secondary for Michigan.
They have some nice safeties as well. They showcase great rotation at this position. Makari Page is probably going to be the standout. Rod Moore in his 10 games, he's been really impressive. Keon Sabb, Quentin Johnson, that is. They've been really good, especially the guys that are backups in this group. I think overall the secondary doesn't have really any weak spots at all. They're just, attacking those outside corners and trying to make plays against some tough coverage and then clearing things out underneath. I think that's going to be the biggest way to expose them. At least that's what Maryland showed. In the Buckeyes, they had some success down the seam. And, of course, Harrison making some big-time plays. Looking at the Alabama defense, you certainly wondered how they would perform in their biggest test of the year on the ground against Georgia. And they were even better than I thought they would be. 78 yards on 31 attempts, held them 2.5 yards per carry. They give up 3 touchdowns. All those were right there at the goal line. 14 touchdowns allowed this year, over 1,600 yards. So certainly not the most polished run defense. They struggled against Auburn. Both of those teams in the SEC title game had issues with that rushing attack that, has that QB threat run, explosiveness in the backfield. I wasn't worried about that one bit, Nick, and I was certainly not shocked at all to see them have an impressive turnaround against one of the nation's best, most physical ground and pound attacks.
This is a very physical defensive line, a very physical run defense here. They struggled at times, but they stuffed Georgia. They really got the job done on the ground. 3.7 yards per attempt rushing, 14 touchdowns given up on the ground. I think those are solid numbers. In total, his defense is 18.4 points per game given up. This is a defense that we thought was going to be really good in the offseason. I thought this could be one of the best defenses in recent Saban era, and this is one of the best defenses in recent Saban era. This is a very fantastic unit, and it starts with that front defensive line that really gets in the backfield, gets sacks, and puts pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, guys like Tim Keenan, Justin Egbany, this is a defensive line that certainly doesn't have the production of years past, but they certainly have played with a lot of physicality up front. Even if they aren't exactly getting to the backfield, they do a great job of just holding them in their tracks. Plenty of guys that go around like Tim Smith up here. And again, I think Keenan's been great. Jaheim Otis gets on the field for them, a big body there. Very good defensive line. Most importantly, though, when you talk about this defense, we're going to talk about the linebackers. Deontay Lawson, I said last year, I was not happy with us play one bit. And if you wanted to be the alpha dog, he was going to have to improve tremendously. And, there was a time in that game against Georgia, we had back-to-back great plays to help this defense out. And, the guys next to him, Jahad Campbell, and a complete athletic specimen, really stepped up big time this year. Tresman Marshall, the former Bulldog, he's been, getting better as the season goes on. He had better production early on, but he's still an impressive force there in the middle. There's a lot of competition going on for playing time there, and that's a good thing. It certainly has benefited this defense. Most importantly, though, the guys coming off the edge, these are terrific ball players. You look at Chris Braswell, Dallas Turner. They both have double-figure tackle for loss numbers. They're approaching double-figure sack numbers as well. You talk about that matchup with those tackles, Nick. They certainly played a Georgia team that has a bit of their own struggles at their tackle spots. And I think Michigan, they might be a little bit weaker in those areas. This is going to be the ball game right here.
This is certainly going to be the ball game. These two guys, Braswell and Dallas Turner, have a great opportunity here to attack these tackles and get the job done. Braswell, 41 total tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks for him. He has a pick as well. Dallas Turner, people wondered if he'd be able to repeat the production that Will Anderson had. Turner's been unlocked, in my opinion. 50 total tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 9 sacks. I absolutely love Dallas Turner, what he's been able to do. He's fantastic. The rest is defensive line's fantastic. Deontay Lawson, 61 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. Justin Igbo, 60 total tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks from him. Great numbers there. Tim Smith, 30 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. Tim Keenan, 36 for him, 1.5 and 1. Tresman Marshall, I've been impressed with him as well. Like you said, the former Bulldog got a fumble recovery against Georgia, a big momentum swing there in that game. He has really got the playing time that he wanted. He came over here and was looking for playing time. He found it. I've been really happy with Tresman Marshall. 55 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. This entire front part of this defense is fantastic, and they're going to have a great opportunity against a weakened Michigan offensive line that's missing some of its players due to injuries to get after J.J. McCarthy and stuff the run.
And the biggest problem I do have here, and kind of a concern, is that against LSU, they played so well in coverage that Jaden Daniels, these guys were downfield 20-some yards, and he was able to just take off. He had 163 yards on 11 carries. McCarthy's obviously not Daniels in terms of speed or ability to make people miss, but this is a fast runner. He's broken off some big runs in his career, and that's certainly an area he figures to expose them in. How do you think they're going to look to counter that? Because I'm sure Nick Saban, Kevin Steele, these guys are going to be well aware of what happened against the Tigers, because that can be a big key right there, extending drives or picking up big plays when they probably shouldn't be.
That could certainly be a big key. I think that's one thing that Nick Saban and his staff are going to have to work on. Kevin Steele, they're going to have to dial up and make sure that they nail that these coming weeks during practice and during film session. I think they'll be able to contain this and make this a non-issue, but it is something to concern you with. Daniels is just a freak athlete. I think it's kind of more of a one-off more than anything else, but it is something to keep an eye on. If they can find success with McCarthy running the ball, that could really work out in Michigan's favor.
Looking at this secondary, LSU, when you speak of Daniels, they had plenty of success all over the field. He was certainly tearing them up for a good bit. Tennessee early in that first half, they also had a great success against them. Shut them out in the second half after that. Texas, back in week 2, again, I thought the safeties would probably struggle in that game. They got absolutely torched, and it was a pretty bad day for them there. They've toughened up ever since, though. They don't seem to really get beat over the middle as much. And against Georgia, I figured they were not going to be able to, the Bulldogs, that is, expose much on the boundaries. But when it comes to the inside, guys like Razmi Jack Saint, Brock Bowers, those guys can certainly hurt you across the middle of the field. And they didn't do it very often. They had a handful of good plays to help continue drives for the Bulldogs. But, back in that offense, we consistently saw them just tear opponents apart with great confidence, great velocity across the middle. Alabama completely stifled that, and I think that's something that, when Michigan had success against the Buckeyes, that's what it was. Loveland across the middle of the field, yards after catch. These corners, including McKinstry and Terry and Arnold, who are also great run defenders as well. It's going to be, pretty easy for them, I'd say, to lock up these Michigan pass catchers. Across the middle of the field is going to be the issue. Caleb Downs, again, another guy who's been great as an extra hat in the box, defending the run, coming downhill. He's been terrific in coverage ever since that Texas game. Malachi Moore's having a big redemption season. This is a secondary, Nick. They certainly have had a little bit of issues, and you can certainly be frustrating at times, especially guys like Jalen Key and Trey Amos. This is a secondary that had a great game against Georgia. I know the stat sheet says they had 271. They did, 243 that is, and they did allow a 72% completion rating, and they've allowed more touchdowns than interceptions. This is a really good secondary that's incredibly versatile, and against Michigan here, if they can defend the middle of the field, it could be bad news Bears.
This is certainly a possibility that if Michigan can attack the middle of the field, it could be really a tough spot for Alabama. Caleb Downs, 99 total tackles, a true freshman sensation, leading the team in tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 picks, 3 pass breakups. Very impressed with him. Terrion Arnold having a really solid season, 61 tackles, 5 interceptions, 11 pass breakups. He looked really good against Georgia, was comfortable the entire game. Kool-Aid McKinstry having a great season as well. People really have not been throwing to him, so I think his stats are a little below what they should be because he hasn't been getting targeted as much as you might think. 7 pass breakups, 27 total tackles for him. We saw some other guys step up. Trey Amos came in after an injury, took out McKinstry for a little bit there. Amos looked good. He has 4 pass breakups on the season and limited ability. They're able to rotate Jalen Key. He's solid as well, 56 total tackles for him, 1 interception, 1 pass breakup. So they do have some nice rotational pieces if they need to move pieces in and out. This is a nice secondary. Malachi Moore is really good at that star position, 49 total tackles, 5 pass breakups for him. Overall, it's a secondary that I love. This is a secondary that's gotten better every single game that passes. They're a very talented secondary, and they're going to have a great opportunity here against Michigan, against some, not as talented weapons. If they can shut them down very quickly, this could be great for Alabama.
Looking at the tail of the tape, team comparisons. Looking at quarterback, I think it's appropriate to just call it even at this moment in time. I think Milroe might be edging a little bit higher, but McCarthy's doing his job as a game manager, and he's certainly been able to step up at times. Didn't look great against Maryland, completed a high percentage against the Buckeyes. Running back, I'm gonna give the edge to Michigan. Regardless of health for Bama, I think that's certainly the top 1-2 punch in America. Wide receiver, I'm going to give the the edge to Bama, that is. I think they're just a little bit deeper, and I think they have more athletes as well. It's really just a 3-man group for the Wolverines. Offensive line, I called it even, but I think at this moment in time, the tackles are just playing much better for the Tide, and I think they've also figured things out on the interior as well. So I think Alabama probably has the edge there, especially after a nice physical effort against the Bulldogs, where Michigan against Iowa kind of struggled in that capacity. Defensive line, I'm going to give it to Michigan. I think they're a little bit deeper at that position. I'm not really going to debate much on that one. Linebacker, nice duo, nice 2-3-man group for Michigan. Love Colson. I think Barrett's having a great year. But the guys for Alabama, they've been highly productive, and they've really figured things out in the middle for there. I'll call it an evenly matched secondary as well. I think the Alabama players do a much better job in run support. But there's some more ball hawks here for the Wolverines. Very tough across the board, Nick, but there are some clear edges in terms of matchups that certainly favor the Tide.
Extremely tough across the board. I think that a lot of these are even. I think defensive line, you can make it even as well. I think the only one that clearly belongs to one team over the other is running back for Michigan and wide receiver for Alabama. I think the rest are toss-ups. You can put them in even. I do like linebacker going to Alabama. These are 2 very even matched teams coming out of 2 of the best conferences in college football. This is going to be a great matchup and a slugfest for these 2 teams.
Look at the final thoughts in the prediction on the Rose Bowl. Obviously, this game's not for another month, and we'll certainly revisit it. But right now, Michigan, I think they must find ways to be in short conversion situations. They got to put constant pressure on Milroe, try and force him to take sacks or throw interceptions. For Bama, stuff the run, be physical up front on the O-line again, attack the middle of the field, unleash those edge rushers. And I see Michigan's favorite in this game, and obviously it's not really a home contest for either of them going out to Pasadena. I think Alabama, they have a big edge when it comes to those edge rushers against the tackles for Michigan. Don't think they're going to be able to run the football. I just think it's really hard in modern-day college football to just be consistent at running the football and doing it with ease. Georgia was really the one team that could do that. And Bama, they completely just dominated them, Nick. So I think Bama's going to force this offense into some tough situations. I don't even know if Michigan will hit 21. I certainly think that the lack of talent at wide receiver is going to catch up to them at this moment in time. I know obviously Michigan fans are not going to agree with that take. I just definitely think the rubber is going to meet the road at some point, and it's going to happen out there in the Rose Bowl.
As an Alabama fan, I will not make any picks. I'm an alumnus of the university. This is a very exciting moment for Alabama. Nick Saban, they got a point to prove here. A lot of people are upset that Alabama got in the playoff over Florida State. Ultimately, I think that was the right decision as an Alabama fan and as a neutral college football person who works in this sort of sphere. I think this makes a lot of sense to have Alabama in here against Michigan. You want to pick the 4 best teams, and that's what you got with the 4 teams picked today, in my opinion. This is a great matchup in a historic venue at the Rose Bowl. Alabama has had success in the past, the Rose Bowl. The last time they played in this actual venue, they beat Texas for the national championship game in 2009. This is a great opportunity. Michigan, a lot of history with the Rose Bowl as well as part of the Big Ten, with the tie-ins that have been part of that bowl game for so many years. So this is a big opportunity for both programs. Michigan, they want to get over the hump and they want to prove the sign stealing scandal was, a nothing scandal, and beating Ohio State certainly put that foot forward. And now they got to take that giant leap by knocking off one of the best teams in the country in a dynasty in Alabama with Nick Saban. This should be a great matchup back and forth, a very exciting game here between 2 historic programs looking to go to the national championship game. This is a very fun game, and we're going to see what happens here. I think Nick Saban has a point to prove. They want to prove the committee was right in putting them in. I think that's something they're going to work on throughout the next couple of weeks. This is a very exciting matchup. I like what we see on paper here, and I cannot wait for this game on New Year's Day.
It's going to be it for today's episode, guys. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely looking forward to this, the playoffs, these 2 games. This one and the game we're going to cover a little bit later in the Sugar Bowl. Fantastic matchups.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.